All right, today's media intake has sufficiently triggered me enough that the only reasonable thing to do is sit down in front of a microphone and record a manic, productive outburst about race. Yep, let's talk about race because you and everyone like you, everyone living, is wrong in what they think race is whenever they bring it up. So rather than, well, let's begin at my perspective. Because the first thing you're going to do is tell me I'm a racist because I'm telling you that you need to rethink how you think about race. And that's fine. The problem is that only people who insist on the, I don't remember what the pre-bellum period is, but the antebellum period. Anyway, I'm sorry. I get confused about that word. Anyway, you don't understand. Anyone racism belongs to those people who insist on the antebellum worldview, and that is specifically the Reconstruction worldview of what race is and how race should be handled. And so what that means is if you have a worldview that says that black and white people or Asian and white people or Latino and white people, that people are different based on what their skin color looks like, and you try to fit the world around that, and you say that anyone that, whether they're saying someone is better or less than, is a racist, if you identify other people as racist, what you're doing is called projection, because you exist inside a racist worldview and you have cognitive dissonance. And so you're going, well, I know I'm not a racist, but my worldview is racist, so everyone I see exhibiting my worldview must be a racist. Unable to look back at yourself. So let's look at me. I grew up in an outwardly racist home. My father was a fan of all of the slurs, to the point that I didn't realize that some of them were, while hilarious to say and hear said, are hurtful to people to hear. You're not going to hear any of them. As I'm no longer a 12-year-old boy in Charlotte, North Carolina, who doesn't understand hate speech. I am, in fact, a 36-year-old man who spent 5 years in Columbus and Asheville, North Carolina, almost 10 years, actually, between those two places, being called the most horrible racial epithets by black people. So I know exactly what it's like. I spent my last therapy session crying about the abuse and the horrible names that I was called and the end of life moments that I had because I couldn't face the culture around me. I was the only white person I knew, and they treated me horribly. So, what you don't understand is the word race. You don't understand even what it means to say race. And so you'll hear a lot of people say something like the human race. And what they don't understand is saying that, while it is reactionary to the idea that it's reactionary to the idea and rejecting the idea that there are evolutionary descents from individual clans of people that eventually, I don't know how you even want to describe this. I don't know what the actual nomenclature is, because you're not allowed to know what the nomenclature is, but we definitely dimorphized in certain ways. So whenever you talk about the human race, you're using the same language that racists use when they think of the different skin tones, the different body shapes, the different face features, and then the different cultural outgrowths from all of that, from specifically having been isolated tribal people who intermingled with a narrowinger, a more narrow and then increasingly narrowing gene pool. so that we came out looking broadly Asian, broadly Indo-European, broadly South Asian and Southwest Asian, broadly African, broadly North American, broadly South American. What you don't understand is you don't understand the word race. Because, see, the word race, when we're talking about human peoples, that is the same word that we mean when we say to run a race. It's the same word. It means a definite beginning and a definite ending. And then what you're reacting to by insisting on the human race is actually a biological, and by that I mean biology, the science, and by that I mean the life sciences, and by that I mean you're insisting on a pre-evolutionary, a pre-Darwinian concept, even a pre-Aristotelian, like Aristotle invented our basic category system in his categories. When I say that you're resisting the idea that things can be broken down into species, kingdom, phylum, genus, etc. I don't know the order. I was never interested in school in biology, so I never learned those. And anyway, when I came back to re-engage with it as an adult, it's changed in such a subtle and complex, cobwebby kind of way, spiderweb kind of way, as it should be, because it's better than a tree and better than a straight line. That's a parabolic curve upward. That's not really a straight line. That's a parabolic curve upward. The people who know math are saying, but you don't understand race. And so if you don't understand the idea of a start and an end, a definite start and a definite end, and then if you want to say the human race and that we're all working in competition, you have this, it's not even pie in the sky, it's not even rose-tinted glasses. What you have is an esoteric and even what they call new age. You have this new age ignorance of human nature. And you think that what you have is rather than an anti-religious communist religion, you have a pro-new age communist religion. And so that's dangerous because you're giving up your own thought. And so when you're just saying, no, the conversation is too complex, so we're just going to simplify it to the human race, you're actually using language and you're using a thought pattern that's actually older than the racism that you're actually trying to reject. So you're actually going back to what formed the racism. So insisting on that language is actually teaching kids to be racist. It's why black communities are racist. It's why Jews are increasingly racist. Jewish communities are increasingly racist. It's why, well, if we really remember history, Latinos tried this with Mind of Mencia, and they realize that it's ugly and it's not actually funny, and so they don't do it anymore. The calling themselves racial epithets and denigrating themselves on TV for the amusement of white people, they don't do it anymore. And then it's interesting because they don't do it anymore, you can compare them to the communities around them, and you can notice that the people with educations that aren't getting jobs in the Asian American community, the very same people that made sure that the 90s conservatives won, and I'm thinking about the wrong bill, affirmative action was recently repealed, are the Asians. The Asian Americans were being misproportionately discriminated against by the liberal fascist college administrator class. And so if you look at those people who over the course of the last half decade were misproportionately discriminated against by the liberal fascist class, what you'll find is that they're making self-harm racist jokes for white people's amusement. This is just how they're existing now. And so it suggests that by insisting that race isn't a thing and that it's a social construct, as you'll hear people say, and that it's used as a club to beat people over the head so they'll submit to either doing harm or allowing harm to be done to them, and really more importantly, it's a tool for the marginalization of an already marginalized people. What you fail to realize is that only a slave knows it's a slave, And the only way that a slave knows that it's a slave is when a not slave tells it that it's a slave and that it doesn't have to be a slave. And so basically, the only person who knows they're a racist is someone who's been told by someone who proclaims to be a non-racist that the racist is a racist. And so the only people throwing around race and throwing around the race cards are people who have a racist identification. And so we really need to talk about what this means and really what it meant to the century that we've been talking about, the pair of centuries we've been talking about, the 19th and early 20th centuries. Our idea in the antebellum South, our idea in the antebellum, that is the post-Civil War United States, and then again the post-Second Civil War, the post-Civil Rights Movement United States, is that race is entirely about skin color. And this is how the black community can be very confused right now and in a lot of pressure. They're getting a lot of pressure in the news. And it's interesting to me that they haven't got this pressure over the last 4 years for doing this, but the Black National Anthem has got a lot of heat in the last few weeks since the Super Bowl. And it's because people actually listened to it. And as they were listening to it, now and it's what I described to you in my first episode when I talked about wokeness. I almost said first 2 episodes of when they played it, but the first 2 or 3 or 4 Super Bowls that they played that Black National Anthem, I think people were being polite. I think all the people like Megyn Kelly and Ben Shapiro who are talking shit about it now, and even people like Stephen A. Smith getting out and defending it, they weren't defending it and they weren't talking about how great it was and how emotionally moving it was and how it brought them out of the lower realms of thought and into the higher plane of thought, and they had a religious visionary experience whereupon they met the spirit of the Lady Justice and she was black and her nipples were pierced, right? None of that happened. The first 5 or whatever, the first 3 or 4 years, maybe it was even 2, maybe it was only last year, maybe I was just so disgusted by it. The first time I saw it, I knew that I had to wait for everyone to catch up to me because none of you understands race enough to have a conversation with me about why the Black National Anthem is a serious problem. I mean, it's in its name. It's black nationalism, and when you have black nationalism, you are teaching teenage boys that it's okay to kill people who don't belong to their nation. And so what we're doing is we are at the inner city level, we're harnessing this black on black gang violence that the CIA initiated in the 1970s, and we're using it to turn it against just common, average, middle class and lower middle class and really even below the poverty line white homes, which is exactly what Helter Skelter was about from Charles Manson. And so what that means is that what I've been telling you, that these people grew up idolizing Charles Manson, are playing out their ideas and their fantasies on the world stage, and you're like, oh, that can't be possibly true. It can't possibly true that somebody would be an evil wizard and that evil wizard could gain political power. That just can't happen. Well, let me tell you about the 19th century. Because what really tripped me up when I was reading William James' Varieties of Religious Experience, when it was that he kept quoting presidents who were having visionary experiences on the campaign trail. And I'm like, that sounds really fucking familiar to me. That sounds like one certain Donald J. Trump who had a visionary experience. And it really sounds like what turned all of my classmates and really all of my generational peers Democrat in the first place was a certain George W. Bush having a visionary experience on the road to Washington. So let's talk about race. Let's not talk about religion, because the race and the religion stuff are all wrapped up together. And so if you want to dive into religion, you're going to have to buckle your fucking seatbelt, because you're going to get into race, because religions understood themselves as nationalist, because whether they understood what nationalism is or not, nationalism is the religification of the government. And so religions, and this is why modern liberals today identify religion as proto-government. And that was something that I believed for a long time. And in fact, I really need to say it, because a lot of people think now that I'm far right wing, which is hilarious because to be far right wing in 2024, we're in 2024, right? 2024 politics is to be left of center in 1995. We are so far left toward the liberal fascist that just identifying that the kind of liberalism we're headed toward is fascism is considered far right. That's hilarious. To warn against fascism is called far right among liberals. That's hilarious. Anyway, I'm triggered, and so I'm using my mania to talk about what I don't want to talk about. And so it's gonna take me 10 hours to get to the bottom of this with you, because it's very simple. It's actually very easy. But if I say it how simple and how easy it is, and I just lay it out to you, you are going to call me a racist. And what I am not is a racist, because I have been taken advantage of, and I have allowed myself to be taken advantage of without fighting back by people, specifically black people, for 2 decades. And look, if you knew the things that I had done, and if you knew the people that I have loved over my life, you couldn't call me a racist. You would understand that by even trying is just projection. It's just projection. And so anyway, what you'll find if you try to get into religion, and especially if you try to get into alternate religion and you just try to understand religion as a broad net, if in fact what you try to do is engage in comparative religion, what you'll find is the 5 root races. And now, I came to the 5 root races independently, and that's interesting, but I came to them through D&D-based JRPGs, or just D&D-based RPGs in general. And so, the 5 root races, as I understood them, were humans, orcs, dwarves, elves, and gnomes. Those were the root races as I understood them. And so, I spent most of my formative years, that is between, let's say, 8 and 18, I spent a lot of my time wondering whether humans of every skin color, if there wasn't something about the people that we settled among, whether it be gnomes or dwarves or elves or orcs, that gave us the particular shapes that we have to our faces and our bodies, and whether we weren't in some sort of social competition in the environment to get the various skin tones that we got. Because if you read the comparative myths, and the reason that people like Helena Blavatsky got to the ideas that they came to of these 5 root races, they gave them the wrong names. They gave them bad names. Of course they gave them bad names. Helena Blavatsky was one of the very first archaeologists in the world. Of course she gave them the wrong names. She couldn't read what she was finding. She couldn't decipher what she was finding. But in a broad way, she could understand that she was seeing 5 categories. And so if she's read Aristotle, and she's pretending she hasn't read Aristotle, but everybody had read Aristotle by the 1800s. Everybody living in the 1800s had read Aristotle, is what I mean. In that time period, it was required reading the categories, especially if you wanted to do science, and she thought very much of herself as a scientist. She was an archaeologist. She thought of herself as an anthropologist. So the Secret Doctrine and the Isis Unveiled are not worth your time, but she thinks she's doing anthropology. She's doing it at a significantly lower level even than the anthropologist and the archaeologist who were alive at the time, but she was also allowed to do it at that lower level because feminism was burgeoning, and young women wanted to read newspapers and they wanted to read books published by women. And how dare you? How dare you, modern women, turn on her in the way that you have? Turn on her and turn on her readership. How dare you? How dare you, I say. How dare you? All they wanted was to read a woman contributing to science and contributing to the way. And how dare you? Every woman in politics, every woman at the highest levels of society since the institution of affirmative action is only there because the women below her wanted to see any woman there. The only reason anybody wants to vote for Hillary Clinton is because they want to see any woman. And she's the only woman that can get close. She's the only woman evil enough for the men to consider trustworthy. And that's why they won't elect her, is because someone thinks she's worthy of trust, so she's not worthy of anyone's trust. That's true of men. That's true of the men, and it's doubly true of the women, because the women are trying twice as hard, because the women don't fit in. And see, this is why women are now, women have trapped themselves with the whole trans argument. They've trapped themselves by saying, well, women are allowed in the men's spaces, but men aren't allowed in the women's spaces unless they dress up like women and chop off their dinghies. But they got that idea from the harem in the Middle East. It's actually hilarious. If you watch the evolution of liberalism, they're just trying to fit in with who they think are the world's overlords, the ultra-patriarchal Islamic fundamentalist, which is just the funniest. They're the funniest marriages in the history of the universe. Because, you know, the adage that a powerful woman in public is the biggest submissive in the bedroom. And it proves true over and over and over and over again in perpetuity. But we're talking about race, and so what I'm doing is I'm building out for you that these white women that are telling you that you're a racist don't know shit about dick. They got the position they got either because they sucked someone's or because they refused to. It was offered to them, in other words, and they said no, and then they threatened a sexual harassment lawsuit, and so now they have their position. Because I've been thinking about that. If I had gone through with all of my friends telling me that I was being racially profiled by the police and by the places that I was working for being white, that if I had pursued those lawsuits, what's my end game? What does that make me? They all wanted me to do the thing, to be the first person to fight back. They all wanted me to, in whatever way, to be like this girl that's pushing back against trans women in the pool and swimming competition or competitive sport in general. And that's just not my move. I'm not here to tell you how to live your life. I'm here to tell you that the way you're living your life is unthought out, and in that way dumb. But I do dumb things too. I can't stay on this topic because I'm triggered. That's pretty dumb. I think you think. So, what they observed is that there are broadly... How many continents do we have? We've got 5 continents, right? Let's look. Let's double check, because I don't know this stuff. There was a lot of stuff that I've tried to articulate to you I was deliberately not taught in school. Oh, come on. My computer's going to have a freak out. You can do it. I believe in you, computer. You know, I should edit this, but I like to think of these as practice for live streaming. Which I know you're supposed to do it the other way. You're supposed to practice presenting the information fluidly live and then have the put together thing. But you know what? I'm just not put together. I'm not a person who has an ego. I don't have a fully functioning consciousness right now. That's why we're still not talking about consciousness. Seven. There are 7 continents, and so they went 5 root races, 7 continents, because they understood that Australia is connected to Asia, and that the people who populated Australia weren't a root race. They had to get there from Asia. And then they understood that the people in India were a separate root race from the people in Asia, because Eastern Africa used to be connected to Saudi Arabia and India by a continent that did in fact sink, so they were right about that. Now they saw it in a visionary experience and they deduced it from genetic evidence from the lemurs. They call it Lemuria. Now, it wasn't called Lemuria, but now the guy that proposed it was called Lemuria never thought so. So when Helena Blavatsky grabs a hold of these ideas of Mu and Lemuria, these sunken continents that did in fact sink, and there's good evidence for it, and she tries to wrap it up in her visionary experiences, she falls into the second stage of what I'm going to tell you cultists get wrong. Now, I never quite get there in my first 5 parts, and that's fine. We'll get there. But let's get there here, I guess, is as good a place as any to introduce the idea. The second place that they go after they have their visionary experience is that they start to meet other people who know more about the world and have better observed the world from our perspective than they have, and they try to incorporate, without extra visionary experiences and without extra visual knowledge, the things that actually are observed. And so she's going 5 root races. This is why it looks the way it does in an unexpected way. These are the migrations that happened. I saw this in a visionary experience. The only way that we've been able to even come close to testing, and I don't see what you and everyone like you and everyone else and everyone that's not me, that's not true, but what the vastest majority, and so the assumption that I could make about you, and the assumption I shouldn't make about you, what I should continue to say is that the way you're inclined to think about science is that science is about proving something right. It's about having a hypothesis and proving that hypothesis right. And what you're doing is not science. That is belief. You're working toward what you already think is true. So what you're doing when you're trying to prove something right is you're working your way towards saying that what you already believe or what you already think is true, and that the higher power, whatever that higher power be, whether it be your dad or your king or your mom or your wife or God, it doesn't really matter. The higher power which you're trying to prove right. You're just trying to prove it right so you can live your life without questioning anymore. And that's fine. Continue to do that. It's harmful to you and everyone around you, but I can't stop you. I can't negatively judge you. I'm sure that I work my way toward my own ends all the time. It's what our brains are good at. And so if you're doing science and you're participating in the religion of scientism, what you're doing is you're trying to disprove any hypothesis, any evident thinking you know something. You need to disprove it. It's a more relevant question to ask why not than why. We've already been over that. No, I haven't said that it's a better question, maybe, but it is a better question. It's a better place to start from. Is to say, okay, well, I've had this visionary experience. It was profound, and it seems to have materially changed my life. Why can't it be right? Is where we usually start. But what we need to do is we need to say, okay, well, what's wrong about it? How is it wrong? What is it trying to lead me to? Because if the visionary experience is outside my power, if it's a higher consciousness, let's say, words that we're not allowed to talk about and not allowed to, I don't want you to understand, or I want you to contemplate, I should say. If those things are real, what do they want? Right? And so what we have to know is that if they're different from us and they think different from us, then they want different things than we could want. And so they don't want what we want. And so if it seems like they're offering us what we want, we have to understand that that's the root of all story. And that accepting what they're giving us, accepting the call, is in some way making a sacrifice of our free will. And so we have to wonder whether we're smart enough to do the computations of whether our will is necessary in this or that moment or ever. And frankly, our brains are incapable of it. And so in that same way, we're incapable in the visionary experience of truly understanding what we're seeing. And so the worst things, the things that people point out to when they're like, oh, Helena Blavatsky was the worst kind of racist, the kind of evidence that they point to is effectively her saying, look, people in the industrial northern and western hemisphere are confused how they can exist at the same time as what they called African Bushmen. And now I actually think the Bushmen are what they called themselves, but it doesn't matter. Or not, I don't refer to them that way because I don't know if that's hurtful terminology or not. But she refers to them that way. I'm sorry if it is. Um, so and what she means is how is it possible that as the world is industrializing, guns are taking over. Guns are rapidly becoming machine guns, not in her life, but they will by the time her books are being widely read by an audience after her death in the 1900s. They're rapidly becoming machine guns. The killing efficiency of the northern hemisphere, but specifically the western part of it, Europe and North America and the United States, the killing power of these people, the technological advantages that they had in the market economies, but not even just that, but the philosophies and the maths and the ideas that they had come up with in the market economy at all were so dominating world, that is global human structure. She had to ask several questions, and the people, not just she had to ask several questions, because she wasn't asking questions. She was a visionary. She thought she was a conduit to answers. So she's not asking questions. She thinks she's Oracle. She thinks that what happens is that people ask her questions and she gives perfectly flawless, truthful answers. And then by her 40s or 50s, she realizes that a lot of the answers she's giving are metaphors. This is why in the caves of Delphi, the oracle of Delphi, called the Pythia, this is why she spoke in metaphor and poetry in that cave, and then you were given the writ out poem that she spoke, and then the priests, the sober people, the men, would tell you what it meant and how to apply it to your life in one specific way. So you could actually apply it, and this nonsense metaphorical poem didn't just apply to literally every single thing in your life as you're waiting for it to be the star-shaped hole that this damn peg fits in. And then they're also telling you the exact one moment that it's applicable, so you'll come back and donate another sheep. They need to eat too, motherfuckers. And so they're asking the question, how is it possible that London, England can exist at the same time as feudal Japan? How is it possible that not the entire world, if we're all evolving, and we're all evolving at the same rate, and so if we're all evolving at the same rate, and if we're all evolving from the same source speciation, which again, they don't really understand speciation, and really I have to assume that you don't, because I have to assume if you're still listening to this, you have a lot of guilt about whether or not you're racist. And so I have to tread carefully, not just for my own self, for what you take out of this and what you take race to understand. And so the people in the modern, that is the 19th and 20th century Western Northern Hemisphere, were asking the question, how is it possible, if we're all evolving at the same rate and we're all evolving from the same source species, that we didn't all evolve and didn't all invent the same technologies at the same time. So, for instance, at the time, and this was taught clear up until the 1990s, they're only pushing back on it now. I had a teacher, I did a non-Western worldviews course for 6 weeks when I was actually attending Wright State University. And the first class of the course, rather, the professor explains that, we understand religion because of the British Empire and how it was able to consolidate its religious freedoms and its religious toleration after it consolidated its empire. But it's an extremely facile explanation of what religion is. And so I'm telling you that race was handled in exactly the same way. When you're England, when you're the British Empire and you own all 7 of the continents in a very meaningful way, you own land and you own peoples in all 7 continents, and your constitutional government is built on one that understands that your ethnicity is how you relate under the law, race becomes the most important thing to governments and government types. So without any further ado, let's drop talking about race for a moment. Without dropping talking about race, and let's understand a little bit about British common law, because I don't really understand British common law, but what I know for a fact is that the way the medieval period worked is that lives had a value, and injuries, whether physical or non-physical, were done to a person, were judged and monetarily valuated based on your worth as a person. And your worth as a person was derived from your place of birth, your people of birth, so not just the land that you were born in, your country, but also your countrymen, your immediate and your next of kin. And then your value was placed on you based on your profession and your education. And so we still have that. We still have that idea. And so when I'm saying you're going around pointing the finger, calling racist, you still very much think of a person based on their ethnicity and based on their socioeconomic class. And so that's where racism came from. So if you're denying racism, you're occupying the earlier worldview, and the earlier worldview inevitably evolves into the racist worldview. It's inevitable. It's genetic and it's mathematical. It's not like you can skip steps. When you're doing logic is math. And so when you're doing logic, what you're doing is you're saying x plus y plus a plus b equals c. And it requires all 4 steps in order to get to c in this logical equation. Well, that is the case when you're talking about the evolution of human thought. You can't go, for instance, you can't go from the Bronze Age organization of civilization directly into the Iron Age organization of civilization. The weapons and the technology that were developed during the Bronze Age using copper and lead, and the world economy that was necessary to keep that trade stable and fair, so that what happened. And what happened is that in the Stone Age, everyone had technological and military parity. So the major world empires, as they developed out, were on par with one another. So in NFL terms, what that means is that while maybe you had Kansas City Chiefs over the course of time, those Kansas City Chiefs, those Patriots, those dynastic militaries, Egypt, the Hittites, and the Sumerians, for example, if we're just talking about the Middle East, if we just want to shine a light on these people, because we know a lot about these people because of the Bible and because of Christianity and Islam. And so I didn't mean to exclude the Jewish people. So many people do that. So many people, and I've obviously picked up the habit. What I mean to say is the Abrahamic faiths. So let's include all of them and their offshoots and everyone who's ever wanted to attach themselves to it, like the Mormons, and forget what the hell I was talking about and trying to be inclusive. And that's kind of what I'm talking about with race, is we've lost what we're talking about by including too many people under an umbrella that never made sense to begin with. Damn, I actually don't remember. All right, from your perspective, I was talking about why it's okay that race evaluates, that society actually puts different values on the lives of different, from your perspective, races. I would say that the better way to say that, if you want to talk about what you want to talk about, is why we as a people have agreed that people from different socioeconomic and ethnic backgrounds, your ethnicity, your ethnos is the place you're from. So your ethnic background is your country, not your countrymen. And so if what you want to say is that your countrymen, the people from which you sprung, your race are irrelevant. You need to talk about the social status, that is your education. That is where you were born, though, because you have no control over your parents' income, and you have absolutely no control over what your parents do in society. So, for instance, if you were born to Guy and Edna Ballard, you have no control over being born into the I Am cult. In fact, I've been recently watching a lot of documentaries about survivors, children who were born into cult, and you have no control over the pre-existence of the cult in your life. So your socioeconomic status is absolutely your race and your terminology. When you're saying, oh, racism is a social construct, what you're saying is that your socioeconomic status is a social construct, and you shouldn't be judged for it. And you shouldn't be judged for your parents. But you are judged by your peers in and outside of your socioeconomic status. Gen Zers, you have no control of that. Millennials are going to judge you. Millennials are the people who are responsible for making sure that you do your job the way they were taught to do it, because the job pre-exists us. From the standpoint of working at McDonald's, and I used to say this, I've worked at half a dozen startup restaurants and businesses, and they all want to do this thing where they're like, well, we're small business, we don't have to have systems. And I'm like, look, you have to have systems. And not just for your customers. You have to have systems for the people that come into your business. Because imagine if McDonald's didn't spend the $10 million study to know the exact proper method to clean a floor in the shortest amount of time with the least amount of soap and water. Imagine if they hadn't done that. Their floors wouldn't be of a uniform cleanness across every McDonald's. The reason we exist in the current market economy that we exist in is because of standardization in the 1950s, because restaurants, grocery stores, and just shopping in general in the economy needed to be one size fit all, because more and more and more and more women were free from the workplace so they could go spend their days fucking around shopping. Before the 1950s, only rich women got to go shopping in the way that now we find hugely stressful. All of us. I know a lot of men who walk into any kind of shopping environment and immediately have panic attacks. I know a lot of women that find dragging their what is that when you their dysphoric, let's say, husband around the grocery store while their children are asking for every single thing in the universe, because they never taught their children, don't ask for anything. I'll get you what you're going to get, right? We just don't teach that anymore, right? Because we don't have to teach that anymore, because until 2008, everybody was allowed to impulse buy anything they wanted. And really, now it's only now that the upper middle class is realizing that, holy shit, life has been expensive for a really long time. And so we're not. I'm very triggered. I'm reacting to current events in the way that I promised I would. And so what race was trying to do was it was trying to answer the historical question of how did we become so different, and how. And then when you get to ideas of superiority, and what's interesting is that for 100 years, these ideas of evolutionary race, they were never about superiority. It was only the fascists and it was only the liberals that came to the conclusion that, well, if we're in charge and we are better and we do have better weapons, it must be because some god, whether it be the Judeo-Christian god or it be the Nordic god, some God has blessed us, and that means that we should continue to do what we're doing in perpetuum. And that's the liberal ideology forever. I call it being French. because that's what the French figured out. That's how the French wielded Christianity from the Merovingians forward. And it's funny because when I call it being French, people look at me like I'm a racist. They're like, you're not allowed to talk about the French like every French person capitulates to their government because they think it's their religious duty. And I'm like, am I not? Look what's going on in France right now. I mean, actually do. Look at what's going on in France right now. France is exploding with racism because they're cultural enemies since the moment they originally, literally the moment that France first started to identify as a unified people was under Charlemagne while they were fighting the Muslims in Spain. So now they're being forced by the Americans to allow Muslims into their country. This is a people that they've been fighting since the moment they first formalized. Like, I recently saw an English translation of their national anthem, and I'm telling you, go read it. It's about how they exist to fight Muslims. I'm not joking, and I'm not pointing out that racism is okay, because look, the French government is racist. The French government is designed to be racist. Look at how ineffectual the French government is even to make sure that its people get fed right now, because they're so worried about the racism. Racism is an argument that consumes everything. Everything. It's a wildfire as far as arguments go, because it doesn't make sense, so you can apply it to everything. It's an oracle that no one ever gave you the exact single one application, the one moment where it works. And so I'll give it to you, but you're going to have to dig through this nonsense with me. You came here to learn how to think. You came here to see someone do it at a higher level. Let's do it. Let's think. Let's think about this. There were minimum 5 human species on the planet that included Homo sapiens before we became Homo sapiens. Or, I'm sorry, Homo sapiens sapiens. Now, the Homo sapiens sapiens thing is very interesting. I started to talk about superiority, and this is kind of people think that the Homo sapiens sapiens thing came out of superiority, and they think that it went away. Because Homo sapiens means thinking man. And Homo sapiens sapiens means thinking man. And so what that means is that there's evidence that there was a genetic unification that made us in some way more perfect. And now I'm using that language, more perfect, because I began this in my mind and I realized that I was having an obsessive triggered thought about the pursuit of perfection. And now this can't be about the pursuit of perfection. Not anymore. Not the way I've done this. Because I want to talk about race, and I really just don't want to talk about racial superiorists, people that believe that any one race is superior to any other. But the problem is that I have to talk about it, especially because I've already opened the door to black nationalism, and black nationalism is a sort of black superiority. And it's not just a black superiority, it's getting out in front of that argument, and it's saying that American blacks are superior to African blacks, and then African blacks are superior to world blacks. I mean, it's a built-in, they've already got in front of the hierarchy. It's already built in. It's already happened. Like, it's already out in front of us. Like, I mean, you can already see it. I keep saying this over and over into this microphone, but somehow I got Nigeria's Twitter on my FYP, I think is what it's called. And yeah, they're absolutely railing against how Black Americans aren't African, and they don't get to tell them how to identify as Black, and they definitely don't get to tell them how to identify as African. They have never even seen Africa. They probably couldn't find Africa on a map from the perspective of the Africans. Now, I say that like that's absurd, but I would be unsurprised if Jimmy Kimmel did one of those, I'm going to go out and surprise people on the streets with a question that they should know the answer to, and 0 people out of however many people he interviewed were, 0 people out of the people they showed on the broadcast were able to find Africa. on a map. I know a lot of people that think that Africa is a single nation, one country. They have no idea that it's. I think by landmass, Africa is actually the biggest country or biggest continent on the planet. I've seen a lot of stuff that I can't seem to find that wants to say that maps are dramatically misrepresenting in the West how big, in fact, Africa is. But that's because of the stuff that I've been talking about. That's because of cult, and that's because of racism, and that's because of this idea that, well, the Western whites, they developed all of these things, and all of these things are the way the world runs now, and they seem to have some sort of superior efficacy to the way that the things were done by the people who aren't European whites. And so European whites must be superior in some way, and therefore everyone must have to capitulate to the way they do things, because that's what's convenient and best for the market economy that the European whites have built their society around. And there's a certain argument to be made that that's true. It's really hard to be a capitalist, or at least it's really hard to be philosophically of the opinion that the fact is that the world we live in today is the benefice of capitalism. And if we want to throw away capitalism, we're talking about returning to the 18th or even the 17th century. Actually, if we're giving away capitalism, we're returning to the Bronze Age collapse. We have to give away everything. We have to give up everything. That becomes entire worldwide collapse. But that's the goal. That's the goal of these people, of these liberal fascists. The goal is worldwide collapse, because what they know is that the only way to actually take control of the world economy is for the world economy to utterly collapse and for you to rebuild it. Or at least turn it back on, and then be in control of the power. But they know that. That's why electricity is so expensive right now. But anyway, you got these, they're not subspecies. They're subspecies of Homo. Then you got Homo erectus, Homo neanderthalensis, Homo denisovans, I think it's denisovensis. You got the Homo, and then the ones they call the hobbits. And see, the thing they don't tell you, even once you start to get interested in all this stuff, and you really not, and by this stuff I don't mean the religion. I say once you start to get into the evolution, and you start to get into the migratory patterns, and you start to look into the languages, that something that they don't tell you is the reason that the North American settlers thought that the people they were encountering on the East Coast sounded like they were speaking languages that sounded like Welsh, or at least that sounded to their ears Celtic or Gaelic, and then again the reason they to their ears sounded Hebrew is because they genetically were. The 30,000 years ago, the native people that crossed over into North America and made their way to the East Coast were of the same genetic stock as the people who would eventually settle west out of Siberia and become the Indo-Aryan people in 11,000 BC. It's the same genetic stock. The languages would sound familiar to the genetic ear. To the imagination, that they would sound similar because they were made by the same people. That's fascinating to me. And so what that means is that racism is even more facile than you think. The reason the Native American people weren't able to capitulate to the European settlers is because they had the same genetic worldview of spread out, fill the land, and raid one another, but don't actually conquer one another. You're from, and don't rule one another as one people over another slave people, because you're all from the same genetic stock. You're all from the same clan that came over to this place originally. And we did that. That's why the Vikings were able to broadly cooperate, even though outside of Scandinavia, even though they were in fierce competition in Scandinavia over the market economy. The reason they were able to cooperate as a military and as foreign economies is because they understood themselves as working against the people they were among, together as a genetic people, because they had the same family ancestry. And now, Today in the United States, we go, oh, well, that, all that family ancestry stuff doesn't matter. But that's only the case because you don't know who your great-granddad was. That's not the case among the Donald J. Trump and the Nancy's whatever Pelosi of the world. Those people have family traditions that stretch back into the early medieval period. Those people believe that they're connected to the Merovingians at all. Those people really believe that they're connected to the magical past. When wizards walked the world and were throwing fireballs around and fighting dragons. They really believe their families came from that. And they think that certain races were the reason that we made it out of those dark ages. And so there have been a lot of dark ages, and the reason that the white supremacists believe that the white supremacists actually are supreme is because when they looked back on the history of the world, they found out that around 500, at the same time that Europe began its dark age, by 900, the whole world had regressed to a dark age. And the only continent that pulled itself not just out of the dark age, but elevated itself to skyscrapers was the North and Western hemispheres. That doesn't mean they are superior, but from their perspective, it's really hard to fucking argue with the Empire State Building versus a fucking mud hut somewhere in the sun of Africa. It's hard to argue that one is less superior to the other, even as an artistic and engineering endeavor. One took a hell of a lot more know-how. And whether I agree that they're genetically superior or not doesn't matter. They're not genetically superior or not, but are they culturally superior? It's hard to argue if you believe that might makes right, that they're not. And this is why the question that I ask people when they want to come at me at being a philosopher, I ask them, do they know dick about Socrates? Do they know anything about Socrates? Do they know anything about Plato? Do they know anything? Because the Republic begins on the question of whether might makes right. And they never answer the question. They can never answer the question of what justice is. They can never give a good consensus definition, they being Plato. Plato, if you don't know the story of the Republic is a dialogue, and so it's set around a moving conversation as Plato is at a party and he's not Plato, Socrates is at a party and he's talking with various historical figures as he moves through the party with a group of friends. And so people are coming in and out of the conversation as he's moving through the party. And so he has asked them what justice even means. Socrates has asked the people in his group what justice even means, and people are coming in and out of it listening and offering answers to what justice means. And they never come to a consensus, because what does justice mean? Justice it means something different to every single person. And that's the point he's trying to make. And so the first argument that he uses is does might make right? So does the person with the biggest arms and the best weaponry, and does he decide what is just, or does she decide what is just, if we're talking in terms of democratizing who has access to the nuclear passcodes? Does that person determine who's right? And the answer is unequivocally, absolutely, obviously, yes. Obviously, the person with the weapons and the gold makes the rules. Obviously, the person with the weapons has the gold because they needed the gold in order to get the weapons. And if they didn't have the gold and they got the weapons by violence, that's all you need. That is very clear. And the Mayotis Blackburn story, if you listen to Mayotis Blackburn, when she comes into contact with the Black Hand, the Italian mafia at the time, the major Italian mafia branch at the time, they stay well wide of her because she's got significantly more violence and more capacity to violence than they have. This is why, for the most part, even the federal government stays away from the Hells Angels. Because what police chief wants to apologize? What police chief wants to do a 21-gun salute for a pile of stomped-to-death rubble? Nobody. Nobody does. Nobody wants to be responsible for that. So people of extreme incalculable violence, they're largely left to do whatever the hell they want to do. And the liberals have figured that out. That's why they're doing extreme incalculable violence to people right now. That's why, in fact, they're making it to where you're not even allowed to use words that imply violence in public, is so you won't know when they're doing it to you. You won't have the words. You won't know. You will be ignorant of what they're doing to you. And look, I'm not saying, a lot of people think that you have to exist as a dichotomy, that because I don't like liberals, I have to love conservatives. And what you don't understand is that I grew up in a conservative cult and it did damage to me, so I ran away from the conservative cult and I joined a series of liberal cults and they've done damage to me, and I am a survivor. I'm a survivor going, look, if you follow an ism, however you want to think about that, if you follow an ideology, if you follow an ideologue, you have given up your right to free will. And as someone who's given up their right to free will, you've given up your right to speak in public. This is kind of what I'm talking about in the first episode of Intellect and Consciousness, is these people that speak in public, if they understood that they're slaves, if they actually understood in a meaningful way that they're slaves to the corporations or the politicians that they're speaking in behalf of, if they understood that they, as ideologues or as serving as ideologues in the name of corporatocratic income, corporatocratic profit margins, they would retire to mountain monasteries. Let's put it the very nicest and politest way I can. Because that's what human beings used to do in the past. And they know better. They know better than what they're doing. They just think they can get away with it. So for as long as we let Jordan Peterson get away with it, and isn't it just so perfect? Isn't it just so perfect that as I'm going through showing you all of the way that cultists misuse their people, that Jordan Peterson has begun to sexually experiment with his audience, or at least he's begun to flirt with the idea of sexually experimenting with his audience in front of his audience? Isn't that just fucking marvelously coincidental? I think so. It's awful appropriate. And so there were root races. There were people that originally founded the land. We know this. There were stories. There are stories. For instance, they get so upset at Madame Blavatsky because Blavatsky includes the Semites as one of the root races. But what she says is that they did not evolve, that their religion didn't evolve into the next step of human evolution, that they in fact still have Bronze Age gods and a Bronze Age government and a Bronze Age religion and a Bronze Age worldview, and that they haven't evolved out of the Bronze Age. And frankly, Netanyahu is a Bronze Age god king. So and his democratic body wants to give it to him. So was she wrong? Maybe she was wrong, maybe, but she wasn't. She wasn't wrong. You just don't like what it means. You don't like what it implies. It implies that you've been lied to about what race is, and that's fine. You have been lied to about what race is, but getting mad at somebody that's telling you that, like, the Jews worship a god from an earlier time, and that Christianity is a god from an earlier time, and that here I have a book from the very earliest time. Like, that's every religion. Every religion does that. That's what Deuteronomy is. And so when she says they stole their texts and she says the word she used was that they combined and confused their text. That's true. Read Maccabees. Read Chronicles. They have 4 or 5 different conflicting accounts of their own history. That's beautiful. That's fine. That means that it evolved. But they don't get to argue that it's one straight line. And they most certainly don't get to argue an anti-evolutionary worldview. Things evolve. Things evolve. They do. They grow over time. They change. They morph. They look at the sword. Just look at swords. Look at swords. Just in the European tradition. Just look at swords. The the more rarely swords were used, the bigger they got, so that they looked really, really cool on a wall. Because they weren't being used. But when they were being used, they were small, and they were light, and they were sharp, and you didn't see them hanging on walls, and you didn't see them removed from their scabbard except when they were going to kill someone, which is exactly how I was taught to handle a firearm. You don't even touch it unless you're planning on killing something with it. It's a weapon. It's not a showpiece. It's not something to have around to because you like collecting things that were interesting in the past. Swords are the same way, but we think about it and we use them in the same ways too, is what I'm trying to say. And I've lost that point anyway. I'm not arguing that Blavatsky was right. Obviously Blavatsky was wrong, because her argument is that the Aryan race was the superior modern race. But her whole worldview it's not just ignorant. It's devoid of information about Africa at all. And so she has absolutely no information about the Southern Hemisphere. So her races and her understanding of the way evolution works would come to the conclusion that it came to, because everyone in the Northern Hemisphere is fucking Indo-Aryan. Everyone. Everyone was touched by them. Ultimately, even China became Mongolian. And the Mongols were Indo-Aryan. The whole Northern Hemisphere became Indo-Aryan. The only people who weren't Indo-Aryan in the Northern Hemisphere were the Arabs and the Semites. And they were the only people that fought it off. And so anyway, I was watching this breakdown of a kind of... It started out interesting, and then I got to really thinking about the data and what I know, and it's exactly opposite wrong. But this guy who's proposed this idea that the Northern Hemisphere was dominated by Neanderthal, and that the Neanderthal were actually hyper-aggressive hunters and killers, and that they used to hunt down, that they hunted Homo sapiens to near extinction, and that the reason that there's genetic admixture is because they used to capture our women as lifelong playthings and then raise the children for some reason, and only the males were infertile hybrids, but the females were productive, so they would keep the females, and that's why people in the Southern Hemisphere have less. That's why they have less Neanderthal DNA than people in the Northern Hemisphere. And I'm listening to this, and what I'm noticing is that among people, well, there is a very, very real hemisphere bias. So what our species does is any landmass that has two people on it, we divide it along north-south lines always. Always. It's crazy. Look at Korea, look at Vietnam. I had a teacher in high school. I've told this story, sort of. I had a teacher in high school who said that on the first day of school. He's like, we're going to talk about the Vietnam War for this entire semester. And the first thing I'm going to tell you is that every single landmass divides in half at some point, where the north is poor and the south is rich, and then history is the north rebelling against the south. It happened in England, like think of the UK. It happened in France, I guess. Yeah, because the southern parts of France are where all the food and where all the money are, at least historically. It happens in... It's the opposite in Italy, because the north is where all the food is, but the south is where all the money and all the military power comes from. It's where all the navies come from. Rome is I believe in central Italy, but it's south of the Piedmont, and the Piedmont is really the northern part of Italy. So there's the part that's connected to the continent, and there's the part that's the Saki boot part, and the Saki boot part has been in control of the Piedmont part, the continent, the north. It's just it's wibbly wobbly. It's not a perfect match, and that's why I'm coming to this point in my life where I'm like, I've always thought that he was kind of wrong. Is the point of why I'm bringing him up, as I've been testing that against that. But that really does seem to be the case, that it's very much the north versus the south all over. And that seems to be a genetic thing, and it just seems to be the way that humans respond to settlement. So if I have this tree and you have that tree, it's going to be me versus you. And just because of the way things work out, it's probably going to be that the more geographically southern region is richer and more fertile in our and situation. So you're going to be the Cain to my Abel. And that's just how that's always gone. I mean, it's even in the Cain and Abel story, which is typically the first story, like the second or third story that people in the northern hemisphere, especially the western part, ever hear. And so racism, where you've sprung from, it's built right in there. It's built right into everything. It's built right into every story, every mythology, every foundational, everything. It's built right in to the human consciousness, not the human consciousness, to the human brain, to understand the other is different from the self, and then to the higher thought isn't just an ascending of thought patterns like the chakra system until you reach God. It's not that. It's a climbing higher, but it's also a broadening out of the base. The reason that the Tower of Babel is the way it is, and the reason the pyramids are the way they are, is because you're not just ascending a totem pole. We're not talking about world axes. We're not talking about metaphors, honestly. And a world axis and your personal enlightenment are very different things. A world axis keeps the world spinning. Your personal enlightenment is what you can see. It's just what you can see. And so the totem pole and what you can see, the totem pole and the visionary experience have absolutely nothing to do with one another. So the cathedral and the visionary experience have absolutely nothing to do with one another. Now the basilica and the visionary experience are different things. And the ancient Christians knew this. That's why they have different names for their churches. That's why you got chapels, etc. She says that the Semites are an earlier race, and that the Aryans dominated them, and that they needed to just be quiet now, and that their religion was a dead end. She doesn't say that they need to be exterminated or anything like that. And I'm not saying that what she said wasn't used to be hurtful, but it's like what she said is what she was just reporting. She's just reporting the truth, and really she's just reporting what everyone has said about them. And so it really is curious to me why liberal, fascist, atheists, but the Jewish religious, i.e. the Jewish theist fascist, because the atheist fascist and the theist fascist are about different goals. See, the atheist fascist can believe in the democratic process because they can believe that the public school system, the socialized propaganda machine, the thought control process, can work to the point that people can believe that they are freely participating in the democratic process. We've all read 1984. If you haven't, what the fuck are you doing? Anyway, the liberal fascist needs free will sacrifices. And so, from the perspective of people who want to say that, I don't know whether Blavatsky was a racist or not. I know that Blavatsky thought of herself as a scientist, and I know that she was trying to answer a question that reasonable people had. Now, today, we just ignore the fact because we have this kind of relativist determinism that says that, oh, well, these various South American and Pacific Islander tribes that have never been contacted by outside human beings before, they deserve they deserve, or they should continue to live the way they live, because, a lot of them would die from warfare, and a lot of them would die from disease. It's really the disease argument. And then their language would disappear to history, and their culture would be subsumed by the greater world culture, so their temples and their gods and their mythologies and their individuation would disappear into the mass non-individuation, what the liberal atheist fascist thinks of as the cancer, right? And that because they live in their more natural state, the state that they've lived in harmony with nature for however many 250,000 years, let's say, they should continue to do it, because jerking them out of the non-linear dream time of of prehistoric human living, that's not fair. It's a cruelty to those people. And that seems like bald hypocrisy to me when we're talking about these are the same people that say that I have to get a vaccine and wear a mask whether I want to or not. And whether I want to or not is irrelevant because I wear my mask and I've had COVID. So, I mean, what's the vaccine doing? I don't know. I'm not anti-vax. You get your vax. You don't get your vax. But do wear masks if you're coughing. It's not okay. But these are the same people that are telling you that they're the same people that are telling you don't have a choice but to get the COVID vaccine, but also that you don't have to get measles and smallpox vaccines because you're allowed to live in harmony with the state of nature. So even the liberals are extremely confused. Like I was talking to my girlfriend, I was like, oh, this person is talking about anti-vax. And she's like, what? Anti-vax? What, does he think they're going to get autism? I'm like, no, anti-COVID vax. And it's like, I'm probably not even going to be allowed to post this because I'm using these words, talking about both sides of the issue. Amazing how really, if you really want to get kicked out of the conversation, you really want to get yourself banned on Twitter, talk about both sides of the issue from a centrist standpoint. From a centrist standpoint of saying, well, which one of these do you think is right? People don't want to actually tell you what they think is right. They want to agree with someone who's stepped out on a limb and said something hateful and hurtful about someone else. I'm not about that. You're both stupid. What am I even talking about anymore? Right. Race and root races. When they were saying race in the 1900s, they didn't want to use the word species for a couple of reasons. Largely because obviously humans haven't speciated since Homo sapiens sapiens, since the unification in our genetic and our DNA, our genetic code of the last two extinct human hominin subspecies. So we're contiguous with a lot. We didn't come out of any that we were contiguous with. We speciated from another earlier species that they had already speciated out of. We were among the last of the hominins to speciate. Humans, Homo sapiens, our direct ancestors that came in the chain immediately before us. And then they were in environmental competition. Oh, I brought this up already. I was talking about Neanderthal and the idea that the Neanderthal were these bloodthirsty monsters. Man, this is all very triggering for me, so forgive my mind, but we were in environmental and social competition with these people, but I think his idea that the Neanderthal were the hyper-aggressive ones is wrong. I think that there's evidence all along our DNA and in our brains and in our behavior and especially in our civilizations when they collapse that we Homo sapiens are the hyper-aggressive monsters that capture other species, females, for our enjoyment. Because these are things that we do. We go to war, we plan, we have extremely sophisticated battle strategies, hunting strategies for humans and for non-humans, and we have these clever and evil brains. We have these clever brains that are prone to doing evil. And so I've been talking a lot about good and evil, and I brought up, beyond good and evil being profoundly uninspiring and uninspired, and maybe it shouldn't even have been ever published in the first place, but until like I say, until you can be like God and you can parse out good from evil, it seems to be that's the Homo sapiens state, not the Neanderthal state, not the Denisovan state, not etc. It seems very much that the human state of nature is to be a bloodthirsty killing machine. In other words, to be a narcissistic psychopath, a malignant narcissistic psychopath. And it seems very much that in an effort to not die horribly, females civilized males, because what seems very much to be the case, and prehistoric, or at least pre-modern, pre-technological civilization seems to know that the only way to reform a male who is, let's say, bipolar, the only way to reform him is to attach him to the best kind of woman. But the problem is that he very frequently murders her, because she's not actually, the pressure of being the best kind of woman for the two of you, of being better than yourself, so your husband has not just a good example, but can front in public to being functional, that it drives both of you crazy, and you end up spiraling into violence. That's just how that goes. It's how it's always gone. Read a fucking folklore book. Just read a book about humans and human nature. Like, read about the Wendigo. It's real. I don't like it, but it's real. And if we don't speak truth to power, if we don't speak power to truth, we're just demagoguing. We're just being the liberal fascist, or we're being the conservative coward. What are we doing? Why are we speaking at all? Why are we engaging in the culture? We're going to be weaponized, so why do we not make ourselves a wolf? Well, the reason we don't make ourselves a wolf is because because parents offer their children to us and husbands offer their wives to us, and we don't want that. We want your ears. And I just grossed myself out thinking about men in tights, Robin Hood men in tights. I didn't gross myself out thinking about men in tights. Like, lend me your ears, and suddenly I'm thinking about men in very tight pants. This would be a different podcast if that's how my brain worked. Now it's how my brain works. Oh man, there are so many Queen music videos playing in my head right now. I was watching, we were watching old 1980s music videos yesterday, so I'm just thinking about Ronnie James Dio gyrating around in women's pants, and I don't love it, but it happened to me. I mean, this is what trauma does to us. We share it with people. Yeah, now you get to think about Ronnie James Dio's skinny ass dancing around in women's pants. Enjoy it. Some of you do, actually. Some of you are very happy. They're like, oh, this is my new favorite podcast. He talks about Ronnie James Dio's skinny ass 3 times in a row. Okay, so they were trying to figure out what made us different. Like, what does make us different? Like, why do we have such broadly different features? And we're not really allowed to ask the question now. And I think it's because the answer is one that we don't really want. Because if we have the answer, then some of the things that we argue can be argued out, and you can start to make the argument like, well, this genetic stock is superior to that genetic stock, and this genetic stock is superior to that genetic stock, and this one doesn't have this disease, and this one doesn't have that disease, and you can start to see where the transhumanist argument has good ideas. Because I remember being in the 90s. I remember watching that movie that I don't remember what it was called, but traumatized me, about the guy who wasn't a designer baby, who had to shave his body every day in the shower, and use his loofah to extreme because the place that he worked DNA tested for the watermark or whatever of your genetic designer, because designer baby, I think I already said, so you are a designer baby, but he wasn't a designer baby, and so he thought he was going to be persecuted. And I literally can't count. I have an innumerable number of memories across my 13 years of primary school, as it's called in the UK, I think. My 13 years of grade school, I have innumerable memories of the teachers that wanted to talk about the dangers of designer babies and transhumanism and slapping robot parts on our bodies so that we can jump faster, but now we ain't got no human legs. You ain't got human legs, Lieutenant Dan. Hell yeah. I'm a robot now. I'm a robot. You know, like, what's that movie? Battle Angel Alita? But then, I mean, even Repo Men, that movie, the Jude Law movie. Ty Law? Ty Law might be a corner for the Patriots in the Wayback Man. My point is that once you start to think about the idea that the urban environment of the 19th century, or the pre-Spanish flu 1910s, once you start to think that the urban environment, this modernizing from stone and wood to steel and aluminum and concrete, urban environment is the future. Because if you live in the New York of the 1910s, or any of the major metropolitan cities of Europe, if you live in one of these north and west hemisphere cities, the urban environments with these skyscrapers and the glass and the metal and the men working, you can get this idea that this way of life is the way of life that humans were meant to live. This is why you start to get this euphemism of the city as the urban jungle. That we had evolved out of the trees and the plains of Africa, and we had emerged into the deserts of the Middle East and Arabia, and from there we flourished in the mountain forests of Europe and the jungles of Asia and North America, just all of North America, and then the jungles and the mountains and the da-da-da-da-da-da. You get it, of South America, right? That we are a tree climbing species that built skyscrapers so we could climb and swing around on trees of our own making, of steel, of alchemy. Because you have to understand, metallurgy is where alchemy comes from. And so these, in the 1910s, you're watching these cities go up. 1890s, 1880s, 1830s. You're watching this urban environment make itself, and if you have any historical knowledge whatsoever, you understand that what you're watching is an alchemical process, and not just an alchemical process, but a process by which alchemy is an integral, not just feature, not just part, but feature. Imagine being, I believe it was the 30s, it might have been in the 50s. I don't think I've seen color video of this, but I have seen color. Imagine going to Sears, and as you're walking in the door, you get a full body x-ray on a live screen for you to see what your hard parts inside your body look like. And then imagine knowing that what you were doing was irradiating your insides, turning it to cancer mush. So you can understand why, after learning that just the normal things that we thought, look at the cool things that modern science can do for us, turns out those things turn us inside out. You start to see why maybe I'm a little bit dubious, not just of transhumanism because it's an ism, but I'm very dubious of transhumanists. Because of what all of this is to build out what I started to say, and then I need to let you go, and then I need to start back over on another part. But it's about these people in the 19th century and these people that still participate in the racist worldview today. Because these are the same people that participate in Planned Parenthood. These are the same people that when they get pregnant do the test to see whether their child is going to have spinal bifida, etc. These are the same people that capitulate in the way my mother didn't to the pressure of these doctors when they think your child is going to be, in their language, defective. This is how we think about one another. And so if you can say the human race, you can begin to understand that what I hear is transhumanism. I hear not what I was taught, that once we all admix because we're all living in the same urban and non-urban, rural and suburban, so non-urban environments together, and we're no longer using skin color alone as the deciding factor in mate choice. Once we're all roughly the same skin tone, I was taught, then we will have speciated away from the Homo sapiens sapiens into something altogether new and superior. But that remains transhumanism, because that remains ridiculous. Because in order to do something like that, you would have to mass migrate the Oh, wait a minute. You would have to destabilize the country, the environment, the ability to survive on the landmass for huge numbers of, hold your breath, Africans. And then you would have to force countries that can't house and feed them to give them government jobs and ownership stake and local business and the function of the economy. And do you know what that sounds like? Do you know what that sounds like? It sounds like what the Jews were asking for in Babylon. So when I ask the question, why do these liberal atheist fascists ignore the fact that Jews are religious fascists and and they just or they just, I don't know, do they blind themselves? Do they blinder themselves? Do they think that, well, you can be culturally Jewish and not practicing Jewish, and that really what they don't want you to be is anti-Semitic toward cultural Jews, not the religious Jew? But the problem is that the argument that they get into is one of theology, but then they admit as atheists that they don't understand theology. So why are they arguing in favor of the Judeo faith? Oh, right. Because it's the first name in the Judeo-Christian, and they think that the Muslims are daddy. And what's common between those two groups of people? Oh, right, they have unethical and amoral money. So these three groups of people, the liberal, atheist fascists, the secretive and culturally Jewish only, very wealthy Jewish population across the world, and the Saudi Arabian prince class, they all have a love of money in their hearts, don't they? It's very interesting. I don't think any of them is bad for it. Look at the lives they lead. I would love a life of luxury where I didn't have to think about the harm that I cause by doing the things I do. I would love that. But I would also hate to see my face caricaturized on the front of New York Times. So I can absolutely understand why none of those three classes of people, well, rather, why all three of those classes of people are protected. Once you see it so much as an evil person, what you don't want is to continue seeing it. And so what do? You put the dunce cap on the New York Times, and then what happens to printed publishing? But isn't that what the liberals are doing? Aren't they trying to kill printed publishing? Aren't they trying to kill mass media, the old media in general? You know, to be progressivist is to be trans time as well. It's to be, we don't have a term for it, but it's to believe that you're we do have a term for it. It's to be Adventist. Is to believe that the coming future that we've been promised is coming isn't just coming, it's imminent. And that it's not just a slow evolution that you'll sleep through if you're not careful, And literally, I mean that, because you end up spending like a third of your life asleep. And so if you're not paying attention over a third of the, you can miss big change. A lot of us didn't see 2008 coming. A lot of us didn't see 9/11 coming. A lot of us didn't see Trump getting elected. A lot of people have been snapped awake by trauma, and then there aren't the infrastructures necessary to not put people back to sleep, teach them what to do with the fact that they're awake, and then how to go back to sleep and rest. I've been studying the sleeping sickness. My girlfriend is a wealth, a font of knowledge about pathogen and illness, and I'm learning that a lot of what happened in the 19th and 20th century, the 1800s and the early modern period, is that people were getting these diseases that were bedriding them. And then if you start to listen to the accounts of these people who are bedridden, and this is about race, it's still about race, because the people whose accounts we have seem to be largely white people. They're all exhausted. They're just emotionally and physically and psychically exhausted. At every level of human society, these 19th and early modern period, early 20th century people are just exhausted. William James talks about an epidemic of self-ending around the world. And then I could be a conspiracy theorist, and I could be stupid, and I could be asking whether this star-shaped and this, whether this 7-star and this 7-pointed and this 9-pointed star fitting, 7-pointed star fitting and this 9-pointed star fitting match. Man, that was hard for me to say. But one of the things that kills you from the sleeping sickness, and then it seems in general that Parkinson's is a depletion in the brain of dopamine. And then what I was told is that what kills you in these diseases, and what because my understanding of the way the sleeping sickness of the 1920s went is you were sleepy, and you were sleepy, and then you were sleepy, and you didn't want to get out of bed for days and days and days, no more than to eat and drink and that in the hospital. But then once you were like, all right, I've had the rest, I've caught up on the rest that I in my mind felt like I needed in my body, then they feel trapped and they can't wake up. And so what I've been told is that what that is it's something to do with the dopamine center in the brain eventually withers to the point that it no longer is even in the brain at all. And now I meant to do this on my own time. But let's see if my knowledge of what I think dopamine is, because what I think dopamine is the happiness drug. What is the role of dopamine? I just typed dopamine into Google and I got this response from Health Direct. That's healthdirect.gov.au. Dopamine acts on areas of the brain to give you feelings of pleasure, satisfaction, and motivation. Dopamine also has a role to play in controlling memory, mood, sleep, learning, concentration, movement, and other bodily functions. And so what that means is that what that suggests to me is that there is something that happens when we go through long-term withdrawal from happiness, from satisfaction, from good, healthy kinds of self-expression, self-recognition, and then outward recognition. And that sounds familiar to me. That sounds like everybody online. It sounds like the people that are lashing out at race, and they're blaming They're blaming race war. They're blaming the civil rights movement. And then, as I've already said, we need to be careful about, I brought it up, the Black National Anthem. We need to be careful about, and we need to really ask ourselves whether it's good or bad that we're allowing the entire black, or self-identifying, now that there's this woman who's finally admitted that she's been self-identifying as black, and so you're going to see transracialism become a much more prevalent thing. Just allowing the black national community to reinvent itself within the wider world civilization. But now I kind of have a hypothesis for why we're allowing them to, beyond just normal politeness and true compassion and patience. I think beyond even the cynical virtue signaling of looking away and saying, "Oh, I'm a good white. I don't meddle like a missionary." We have to be careful, because what I think happened in the 19th century is that people were unhappy for so long, they began to go into visionary states and enjoy the dream state, the sleeping state, more than the waking state. And I think the reason the mind cure movement worked, and I Am became what it became, and cult and new age became what they have become, is because these cults promised you a waking dream state that was preferable even to your sleeping dream state. So when we let these people that walk around saying they're woke tell us that we're asleep, I wonder if what we've done is we haven't recreated the same environment. Actually, I don't wonder whether. I'm going to point directly to the fact that what we did as a Western civilization, and if my black audience have anything they should be angry for, they need to understand that it's this one very specific thing. And this will help you win arguments against the people that want to do this one specific thing to you, my black friends. I've had so many black friends that I truly loved that could not trust me and could not love me because they were too racist. And that's what their family members felt in the 50s and the 60s. And so they've acculturated that trauma. And I feel for them, because my family is an acculturation of trauma, and much of my response to the acculturated trauma that they are lashing out at me with is acculturated trauma. But we call acculturated trauma cult, and we call the people that do the trauma cultists. And we know how to fight these people. We know how to defeat them. We know how to protect our children from them. We just choose not to, so that we aren't accused of cult. Nancy Pelosi isn't going out clearing out all these terrible cults, all these Satanists, for example, ruining California by making it unsafe to be under the age of 25 in California. Because if she uses the words, she has to admit to being culpable to the same behavior. So else is a springing out. It's a wellspring. It's a race. It's literally a competition to the end, to be the next. The racist worldview is a competition to be the next human species. And so what happened is in the 19th century, we put so much pressure on our middle and our lower classes, our working classes, in other words. We put so much pressure on them just to survive that there was no room left for happiness, and there was absolutely no room left for satisfaction in their work. We know that's true, not just because I'm reverse engineering it because of their illnesses and because of their psychological pathologies and because of their religious expression. We can do that in anthropology for people who didn't write. But these people wrote. And moreover, these people left us a legacy. These people became us. They were only 100 years ago. It's only 100 years ago. We have living memories. Now, they're increasingly unreliable, but the reason you think they're increasingly unreliable is because there are truly evil forces, truly evil human beings out there that need you to misunderstand what those memories say about that time and about those people and about why things like the Great Depression, World Wars I and II actually happened. And it was because these people believed that the way that what would happen after those wars is that we would be a different species. And then they believed that that species would dominate the Homo sapien in the same way because they believed the same things that the UFO cultists still believe today. They believed in the Anunnaki. They believed in the higher being, the being that was closer to God. And you see it. You see that people still believe it. Just read David Icke. You've heard the jokes about the lizard people and how Hillary Clinton is actually a lizard person. Well, the lizard people is the only way that a visionary mind is able to understand a malignant narcissistic psychopath. And truly, it's the only way they're able to understand a sociopath. Because a sociopath's decisions don't make sense. A sociopath has no real interest in hurting, but they don't really have any interest in doing a good job either. They just have an interest in being close to sources of power. And so in their language, this is where the Luciferian rebellion comes from in biblical traditions and extra biblical traditions, is they were trying to understand racial diversion and the way that we don't understand. We never came to understand racial diversion because it's hard to make sense of. It's hard to make sense of because we have evidence for it, but it's metaphysical. We don't have evidence. All we have is the bones. We don't know why, for instance, the Asians lost the eye flap situation. I don't know what it's called. The fold. We don't know why. I know why. It's sexual selection. It's always sexual selection. It's always. They didn't start breaking their little girls' feet so they could sell them to perverted old men that didn't want them walking around or specifically able to run from the compound of the home. They didn't start doing that because there was no sexual selection to it. And so if we're going to maintain this Victorian idea about the survival of the fittest, but there's no sex happening, there's no sexual selection happening, we're just lost in an argument that doesn't make sense. And so if you don't understand race as running to get the women, you're dumb. You're just too stupid to think about this in public. You're too stupid to be credible. You just are. It's in the word. And so this is why your most extreme racists are always, especially when it comes to women, hypergamist racists are always being penetrated by not their race. Is because it's not about that. It's about perversion, and it's about kink. And kink is what it is. It's what it says it is. It's a kink in the brain signal. It's a hose that's been twisted, and so the fluid comes out either at a higher pressure or whatever. Not at all sometimes. Sometimes it just can't work without the thing or because of the thing, because of the source of the thing. Sometimes it's too close. Sometimes the recreation is too close and it just doesn't work anymore. It's a thing. Because we're all humans. We all have brains. And so race is about trying to jumpstart the coming evolution. I mean, right there, it's in the book where Tool and all of the Nazi ideology came from. It's called the coming race. And what they found was racially, genetically superior people that were going to come out and dominate us, and then we were going to get trapped in their genes, because all these people are having is trauma visions. They're having trauma nightmares, trauma imaginations about what it actually means to be the only surviving human species left. And then they're having trauma nightmares about what it means that Northern Hemisphere whites dominate all of the other species. What does it mean? And so they come to the cognitive conclusion, the cognitive closure, that it must mean that something about us is better. But how is that the wrong conclusion to come to is what I want to know. How is that the wrong conclusion to come to? Guns are a superior weapon to wooden spears with stone points and wicker shields. They just are. From the standpoint of the arms race, from the standpoint of the technological arms race, how can European governments argue that they're inferior to these African governments? And the point that I'm making isn't that they should have conquered those people and should have governed them and should have stolen their resources. They should not. That shouldn't have been the impulse to begin with, but it's the genetic impulse of the Indo-Aryan people. Obviously, the Southern Hemisphere people have a different way of life. In the same way, as I was trying to begin, Blavatsky, by her time, understood that the East and the West were just as different as the North and the South, that the West was a left-brain dominant people that wanted to know why, and they wanted to know how come, and they wanted to build stuff, and the East was a right-brain dominant people that wanted to talk slowly about what we could know, and that the left was interested in physical things and the right was interested in metaphysical things. And by golly gee, if our brains don't actually work that way. Well, we wouldn't know our brains actually work that way if the people that were interested in brain science weren't reading and devoted to and spending money on and having sex with Blavatsky and her friends. The visionary state is necessary for the scientific state. So if the science wants to throw out the visions, they have to throw out the scientists that came up with the science that we have today. And so if what you're trying to do is you're trying to say that we don't observe one another as physically different, then what you're actually doing is saying that the black people should have remained slaves. That's your argument, because in just a few years, it will be inside the next 10 years. You are going to be arguing that people can be black while they look materially white. That will be your position. And you will be calling me racist by saying that people are different because they have different skin tone, different skin types, not just different skin colors. We smell different. Our hair follicles are different. We are materially different. And the argument used to be we're materially different in the same way that a Great Dane and a Bull Mastiff are different. We're just different. We're the same thing materially, but we're different. And so nobody's out here saying that they're going to cobble together the best dogs and make the most perfect dog. Except they did do that. That's how the Beagle came about. I want to say that was actually Darwin, and that Darwin actually brought his beagles that he invented with him on his boats when he went to the Galapagos. So what I want you to know, what I want you to take away from all of this, is that there's no reason to believe that we don't, there's no reason not to believe that the reason that we look the way we do is because we sexually bred with non-Homo sapiens species of human, and then by interbreeding with one another, once all of them were extinct, our genes averaged out to have between 1 and 5% of Denisovan and Neanderthal and the Hobbit DNA. That we don't have very much of it left. And what that suggests is the reason we don't have very much of it left is because there was a cataclysm and they all died out. That's what the liberals want you to think, that we didn't hunt them down and murder them brutally. The evidences suggest that they died out. And the evidence suggests that they died out during the Younger Dryas, which means that we had been at conflict with them both culturally and genetically for over 150,000 years. If you date the human speciation from our cousin species like Neanderthalensis to 300,000 years ago, that meant we spent nearly 289,000 years in socioeconomic, cultural, genetic competition with other human species that could have won. And then two dramatic events happened within just a few thousand years of one another. Suddenly, the polar ice caps in the northern hemisphere thawed. The northern hemisphere is where the Denisovans, the ones they call the hobbits, and the Neanderthalensis live. Homo sapiens sapiens has pretty much dominated Africa and the southern hemisphere since Homo erectus. The ice caps above the 35th parallel of the northern hemisphere suddenly and rapidly, almost instantly froze, like suddenly they evaporated. And then a few thousand years later, they instantly froze again. And what seems to happen is that the flooding and the storms of the first freezing, called the Younger, or the first flash, the Younger freezing is called the Younger Dryas. So the flash melt that allowed the flash freeze of the Younger Dryas, that seems to have so dramatically destabilized the northern hemisphere that we remember it as the flood myths. At or near the 35th parallel, which really puts the flood myth in the biblical narrative. It puts it as suspect that it belonged to the genetic people that called themselves Hebrew as they were emerging out of Africa. Because you got to remember, their story starts with them emerging out of Africa. Abraham's people are slaves in Africa. He gathered them up in Africa. They're slaves in Africa. That means that they're genetically from Africa. So that means that by the time that they get to Noah, that means Noah may have been exactly what it was, a co-opting of the already existing Babylonian, Assyrian worldview, mythology. That seems to have destabilized things pretty badly about, between 15 and 12,000 years before present. That seems to have destabilized things, but it seems to be the resulting flash freezing that extincted our cousins. Because those of our brothers and sisters, mothers and fathers, grandfathers and grandparents who survived the flash freeze above the 35th parallel seem to have become them and learned how to live in those conditions by them. My understanding, and this might be fringe because I think all we have is a knuckle bone, but my understanding is that the red hair genetic trait comes from the Denisovans. That they were tall and skinny, like Scandinavians. Like, Siberians and the Alaskan and polar native North Americans. Tall and skinny, strong, capable of withstanding that cold because they could march through it to hunt. And then the Neanderthal were about our height, but they were broad, and they were probably hairy in their bodies, and their faces were probably very hairy, and their skin was thick and ruddy. Well, that sounds like my dad. That sounds like the difference in me and my dad. My dad and I have entirely different body structures. And so if you can identify the difference in a Homo erectus and a Homo neanderthalensis and a Homo denisovan and a Homo sapiens from Australopithecus and chimpanzee and etc. If you can identify them from the bones, if you can identify them from the bones and the bone structures, well, it seems to me that the various, what we understand today as races, not so much races, they're very much different in their bones and their bone structure and the way the bones have dimorphized. Not necessarily sexually, but what we would call racially. The racial dimorphism, I mean, you can see it in just the way our noses express themselves. White people have we look like hideous mutations. We do. I can absolutely understand why when they saw British people for the first time, they were like, oh my God, you inbred, weird-looking fucks. Look at your teeth. I can absolutely understand that. We make jokes about it today because we've internalized the trauma of understanding that our ancestors were very inbred Europeans. The conditions of Europe, especially during the winter, the mountains, the winter, turned us into freakish monsters. And so that's why the white supremacists require visionary experiences wherein they see our features, but not the ugly versions, in angels and heavenly beings. It's about knowing what you are and aiming toward being better. But there are a couple ways that we as a society and you as a listener can aim toward being better. You can design your child's genetics, and you can design their childhood environment, and you can design the words they're allowed to say, so the way they're allowed to express them. In other words, you can create a cult, modern or historical, because I've been wondering if, and I've not been wondering if, I've been wondering that these ancient cults like the Dionysian, God, every time I do this, I traumatize myself into forgetting what I'm talking about. The Eleusinian. I've been wondering whether these cults weren't exactly as damaging as cult is today, and if that isn't why the Roman Senate didn't persecute them with the bloody prejudice with which they did, and if that isn't why Waco can only go one way. Cult only ends one way. And it's not because the government needs to silence these people, it's because they are the kind of people who are inclined to one exit. Either self-murder or murder by the hands of the cult. And in their minds, either way, it's either a sacrifice. I was going to say sacrificial act. It's either a sacrifice, that's what it used to be known as, but then the New Age says, no. It doesn't have to be a sacrifice. There's no loss. It's an ascension. It's actually a higher order of being. I'm actually taking more of the cake and eating it in death than I had access to in life. And so whether the cult knows it or not, the cult is actually murdering them in horror. And the way they do their body in death, the mummification, the other things, this isn't honor. They're not honoring them. They're absolutely not honoring them. This is why the Greco-Romans were horrified by what they found in Egypt and in Africa. It's why they were horrified by what they found in Africa. And then it's why, again, the Christian monasteries, or the Christian missionaries of the exact period I'm talking about, the 18th and 19th centuries, 20th century, it's why they were horrified by what they found in the jungles of Western and Central and Southern Africa. Because they were they were horrified by and traumatized by the fact that there could be so many different levels, let's not call it levels, let's call it circles, spheres of abstraction of human behavior. And the only way they were able to reconcile was by saying that theirs was a higher version. But it was the only way they were able to come to it was by their prophets saying, no, there's a higher, there is a better, there is a truer, there is a more godlike way. There is, in other words, a better good, a more perfect, a less evil way to live than liberal fascism. Thank you very much for listening. This has been the Shaggy Dog Philosopher. You've been listening to Shaggy Dog Philosophy. There will be more of this to come. Thank you for listening. I'll talk at you soon.